The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Two anti-government, self-described revolutionaries have shot up a pizza restaurant as well as a Walmart in Las Vegas. We are not going to be naming either of them or using their pictures, which is, I don't know, just something we decided after the last time where we had one of these shootings, which was pretty recently, unfortunately. I just don't think there's really any benefit to naming them or publishing their faces, so we will talk about them in the abstract. This happened in Las Vegas. Two police officers were shot and killed, along with a civilian bystander. The gun-toting duo were reportedly starting a revolution via their violent firearms activity. They were both white, as typically is the case in these instances of domestic terrorism in the United States. The shooters reportedly stripped the dead officers of their weapons, ammunition, and badges, according to a law enforcement official, and subsequently covered the officers with something that featured the Gadsden flag. This is that yellow banner with a coiled snake above the words "Don't tread on me" that has become kind of like the signature image of the Tea Party in the United States. After killing the three people, the female suspect reportedly shot the male suspect and then shot herself, killing both of them. The shooters also appeared to be linked to the white supremacy movement. Police found swastika symbols during their initial investigation. The male shooter reportedly also told a neighbor that he had been at the Cliven Bundy ranch in support of gun-toting tax evader Cliven Bundy, but that he had been kicked out. Lewis, do you realize how outrageous you have to be too extreme to be at the Bundy ranch?
Yeah, that's incredible. I assume he was probably trying to incite violence and trying to initiate a gun battle at the ranch.
All evidence points to this being someone who is deeply ingrained in this right-wing, small government, anti-government, anti-law enforcement ideology that is really exemplified by the Tea Party "Don't Tread on Me" stuff. A review of the male shooter's Facebook page showed that he was a very strong anti-government advocate. He was into Second Amendment advocacy. He was big into Alex Jones and InfoWars and the false flag and other conspiracy theories espoused by Alex Jones. Do people realize what's going on here? Another shooting by white supremacist types. Remember Glenn Miller just recently, the alleged shooter in the Kansas City Jewish Community Center shootings. We have this growing trend of right-wing violence singling out government officials, law enforcement, police. This is the so-called patriot movement, as the Anti-Defamation League and Southern Poverty Law Center define it. And the shooters believed in the New World Order. They literally, Lewis, checked off almost every box associated with these Cliven Bundy, Tea Party, Alex Jones types that are around there.
Yeah, they really do. It's incredible. These people, I mean, if you were to create, as we like to say this, if you were to create a parody of these people, they would be indistinguishable from the people themselves.
These shooters are absolutely, as Lewis is saying, this is what a parody of that caricature would look like. It would be that caricature, unfortunately, all too real here. And the Anti-Defamation League shows that their data show 43 individual violent incidents between domestic extremists of all types and law enforcement in the U.S. Now listen to this. Of those 43 incidents, 39 involved extremists that espoused some type of right-wing ideology. So remember, the corporate media will mostly ignore the right-wing element if possible. They will, of course, ignore the connection to the Bundy Ranch and to the Tea Party, which now is deeply ingrained within the Republican Party. But these ideologies are related. I'm not really surprised, Lewis, that we're not seeing straightforward coverage of that on corporate media.
No, it's unsafe, I guess, to be talking about it in that way.
So as we mentioned, the shooter, one of the two shooters at least, in the Las Vegas police shooting that took place was a fan of Alex Jones on Facebook, posted many times about being a fan of Alex Jones's, about Alex Jones's show, about Infowars.com. And Alex Jones has immediately started a couple of different lines of attack to defend himself from any association with this shooter. Now, of course, let me be completely clear. We are not saying in any way that there is a direct affiliation between Alex Jones and the shooter, by no means. What is abundantly clear is that the Cliven Bundy supporting, Second Amendment fetishizing, small government, don't tread on me, Tea Party ideology that is very connected with Alex Jones was an integral part of the shooter's worldview. Is that a fair encapsulation, Lewis?
That sounds reasonable to me, yeah.
So Alex Jones, conspiracy theorist Alex Jones, basically started saying the entire shooting was a setup. And we've heard this before from Alex Jones, although usually he's not directly connected with the alleged shooters or the ideologies. And this has happened when it came to the Sandy Hook shooting. This happened, I don't remember if with Fort Hood, but the more recent Navy Yard shooting, Alex Jones was talking about false flags and setups. And here's a little bit of audio from the Alex Jones program, again, talking about how this appears to just all be one big staged setup. Listen.
My gut tells me that the cold-blooded, degenerate, evil killing of 2 police officers and a citizen in Las Vegas yesterday is absolutely staged, ladies and gentlemen. And I will document here on air how it is staged right now.
Okay.
Because one way or another, the sick, twisted culture of death and of destruction porn that Hollywood sells to the narcissistic masses was responsible for manipulating the mental illness of these individuals and others.
Yeah.
Or, and this is the much more likely analysis.
Brace yourself.
This was staged.
Yeah, just totally staged. And then we have a little bit of video as well. This is also Alex Jones, basically this time tying in Facebook. Facebook is also very, very much tied in with the entire staging. Watch this.
Oh, and guess what's on his Facebook page? So easy to set this up. Facebook that works with you-know-who so closely. Alex Jones, #1. Alan West, Representative Alan West. We'll do a document cam for TV viewers, and I'll show folks this. And then it continues on here with, Ron Paul, Rand Paul.
This is an awesome strategy from the point of view of Alex Jones. If you are someone who is susceptible to believing this type of thing, every time someone connected to me does anything, I just say it's a false flag operation, and inherently, because of the types of people that follow me, me being, the hypothetical Alex Jones, I'm catering to the exact type of audience that would believe in that type of theory.
Right. These mindless drones who just believe everything Alex Jones tells them. But it's really irresponsible, too, because if you are calling it something it isn't, we're not really addressing the issues that we need to address.
No question about it. And Alex Jones, 9/11 conspiracy theorist, often claims these catastrophes are false flag events, talks about these globalist shadowy figures. He joined right-wing media in championing Cliven Bundy. He's running the full gamut, and people are just eating it up. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I don't want to only focus on the Las Vegas right-wing, small anti-government, don't tread on me shooting, because there was another shooting over the weekend also involving a right-wing Second Amendment fetishist sovereign citizen who attacked a courthouse in Georgia. This is in Georgia's Forsyth County. Yet another right-wing sovereign citizen tried to take over a courthouse with multiple explosive devices and firearms and a large amount of ammunition, wounding a deputy before being ultimately killed in a shootout. A Forsyth County sheriff's deputy was shot in the leg at a courthouse in Cumming, Georgia, and the suspect is reported dead. The suspect has been identified as a sovereign citizen, part of an anti-government group that has been tied to violent attacks on law enforcement all around this country. He was already in court to presumably plead out of some other drug and weapons charges. He was a well-known identity to law enforcement. He was armed with multiple explosives, lots of ammunition on himself and inside the car. He had water as well as zip tie restraining devices. And according to a sheriff, he, quote, came for the purpose of occupying the courthouse. Many of the explosives that the shooter was carrying were homemade. He had been planning it for a while, according to the sheriff. Lewis, it's amazing that we had concurrent extremist, right-wing, anti-government, anti-law enforcement shootings in different parts of the country. We used to just report on multiple shootings on the same day. We now have multiple right-wing extremist anti-government shootings.
Right. Not so surprising. I don't know. I'm not surprised by it. But what I love about stories like this is that these Second Amendment fetishist, sovereign citizen type people who try to do things like this, they show up with explosives, with tons of ammunition, tons of guns, water. He's prepared for the long haul. He's going to take over this courthouse. They all think they're Rambo, David. And all he managed to do was shoot one person in the leg. They're really bad at this, you know?
Yeah, well, you know, I guess knock on wood as far as that goes, because we really don't want the next one of these to take out even more people, and any injury, any death at the hands of these extremists is tragic. But Lewis makes a good point that they have not been, at least recently, successful in committing even bigger amounts of injury and damage. Although what they have done, Lewis, has been, of course, tragic and significant.
It has been, and of course, the last two we just talked about claimed they were starting a revolution. You know, we see how that worked for them.
Actor, comedian Tracy Morgan was in a serious car accident over the weekend where the limo van that he was driving in was rear-ended by a Walmart truck. The truck was being driven by 35-year-old Kevin Roper, who had not slept for more than 24 hours when the rig he was driving on the New Jersey Turnpike hit Tracy Morgan's limousine. Now, we don't normally cover this type of story. It's mostly a kind of celebrity story. However, this has a very important political angle, which is that we have here the issue of restrictions, business regulations around driving and truck drivers. And the issue of driver fatigue was very recently in front of the U.S. Senate, where the U.S. Senate is now considering rolling back a 70-hour cap on a trucker's work week that went into effect in July. For example, Republican Senator from Maine, Susan Collins, is thinking of reinstating the 82-hour work week that the industry desperately wants because it is more profitable. Now, in 2003, New Jersey was the first state to make it a homicide, to make it a crime of vehicular homicide for causing a fatal accident while driving drowsy. There's a statute known as Maggie's Law, named for 20-year-old Maggie McDowell, who was killed back in 1997 when a drowsy driver who hadn't slept for more than 24 hours crossed 3 lanes of traffic and hit her car head-on. And what Maggie's Law says is that it is illegal for a driver who has been awake longer than 24 hours to operate a vehicle. Walmart has said that they are going to cooperate fully and they will take responsibility if they are found to be at fault. But Lewis, here we have a situation where, again, remember, we hear from the right, we hear from the small government, pro-business right, that businesses have they have an incentive to make sure this type of thing doesn't happen. It may be true, right, that Walmart will regret having had this guy on the road for 24 hours, that it'll be negative publicity, they'll have to pay out some money, but apparently the incentive isn't there. And if you step back for a second and if you think about if year after year, Walmart has these overtired drivers driving in this way, the amount they save from that year after year after year far outweighs the negative PR and the settlement money they might have to pay out for a couple of these events a year. So actually, it doesn't really seem that Walmart has an incentive to regulate itself when it comes to this.
Right. We also know that Walmart doesn't even always pay those settlements out or those fines and fees out when found guilty of something. And the audience can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think that a lot of these companies actually offer incentives to drivers themselves who can accomplish things in certain time frames
We do have several truckers, long-haul truckers in our audience, and I know that they will give us some information on this, Louis, but that's an interesting point you raise.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure. I think I've heard of that happening, though.
Yet another example of why we need strict business regulation. Absolutely ridiculous that we have now arguments made that the truckers should be allowed to drive even more. Let's take a break. We've got a great program for you today. We'll be having a great interview about juvenile incarceration. I have your voicemails, and we have some incredible stuff related to Bo Bergdahl. That's next.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show membership program is made possible in part by liberalbias.com. Did you know that study after study after study has shown that increasing taxes on the rich doesn't kill jobs? Weird. The only possible explanation is that the word study itself has a liberal bias. Find out more about that at liberalbias.com. Today's new member of the day is Andreas Adursjo. Andreas, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member, one of many international David Pakman Show members. And you can join Andreas, get all of the member benefits, support progressive independent media. We only exist because of the membership program. Go to davidpakman.com/membership. The discussion around Bo Bergdahl, the rescued prisoner of war, and whether he deserved to have a deal made for him that saw 5 Guantanamo Bay detainees who were unlikely to ever face trial anyway, exchanged for him, has really been the rallying cry of right-wing media. He was a deserter. He didn't deserve to be rescued, especially now that they want to keep taking attention away from the multiple right-wing shootings that took place over the weekend. And the fundamental issue here is that right-wing media, actually, neither right-wing nor left-wing media, nor random people on the internet or on TV or on the radio decide whether Bo Bergdahl was a deserter. That is a determination that it is up to the military to make, and speculation from one or another that he did not deserve to be rescued because he is, there are assertions made that he is or was a deserter are absolutely ridiculous. And we see this all the time, Louis, and unfortunately, we don't have the full AR-15-6 report on Bergdahl, which is classified, but several military sources have spoken on the condition of anonymity about that report, and they say that the report does not indicate, this is a report from 2010, the report does not indicate that Bo Bergdahl left his troop with no intention of ever returning, which is, of course, the definition of desertion. So we don't know exactly what's in that report. The information we have suggests that it determined that Bergdahl was not a deserter, and completely separate from that, it doesn't matter whether in the public eye, in the court of public opinion, Bergdahl is or is not a deserter. The U.S. is getting back a prisoner of war who is an American, period.
Right. I think if you want to, you should look at it that way. You should say, this is a U.S. citizen. This is a U.S. soldier. We don't really know what happened. And the vast majority of the people reporting on this don't really know what happened. So it just seems really irresponsible and stupid to just go out and say, this is a deserter. He didn't deserve to be rescued, blah, blah, blah.
As I mentioned, many Fox News anchors and pundits were immediately talking about the un-American deserter Bo Bergdahl. Shepard Smith was not, and this is pretty interesting. Media Matters for America has put together a clip of Shepard Smith first, which I'll play for you, explaining that it is absurd for people on TV to be calling Bergdahl a deserter. Let's watch that clip first.
If you desert or commit treason, you have to be proved to have done so.
Absolutely.
We can't just decide because some people come on television and yakety yak and we get a report of this and a report of that that's what happened. As the Army said, as the Pentagon said, you bring them home. You bring them home first and then you investigate. One thing is he's missing, you fix that. The other thing is there are allegations that he deserted or did anything inappropriate. Then you investigate that and let the chips fall where they may. It ain't a soup.
Now let's contrast this with what went on basically everywhere else on Fox. Here are all sorts of Fox anchors, armchair quarterbacking, saying apparently they are able to make the military determination that Bo Bergdahl was a deserter and thus did not deserve to be rescued. Check this out.
He's a deserter by all, and it will be. He may even be a collaborator.
Not only was he a deserter, Bergdahl not only a deserter.
It was well known that he was a deserter.
Looks to me like a deserter or a traitor or both.
What are you swapping him for with 5 terrorists now out and about?
How far did they go to get one anti-American back into the country and trade up for 5 anti-American killers?
Why the Obama administration would give away 5 terrorists to get him back.
Is Shepard Smith trying to get taken off of the air, or is this a specific ploy from Fox News to leave one guy speaking rationally so when they're criticized for just parroting these right-wing talking points, Roger Ailes can say, hold on a second, we have both sides represented. Look at Shep Smith.
I don't know. I think on occasion, Shepard Smith is the lone voice of reason on Fox News. This isn't unusual for him. I would say that, honestly, this is probably just his opinion.
I received 3 emails that are wild speculation, but they all have the exact same theory, which is that Shepard Smith must have something on Roger Ailes or Rupert Murdoch. I'll read one of these emails to you. David, Shep Smith is gay. Don't you think maybe he knows something about Roger Ailes' or Karl Rove's or someone's sexual orientation, and he's able to do what he wants because they know if they fire him, their secrets get out? Complete speculation. 3 different people sending me very similar theories surrounding why Shepard Smith is seemingly allowed to say whatever he wants.
Interesting. It's certainly a plausible theory, I guess.
Okay, one of the main grievances that right-wingers currently have with this swap that took place, trading Bo Bergdahl, the American soldier, trading Bo Bergdahl for 5 Gitmo detainees that were unlikely to ever be formally charged or tried. One of the main grievances is you're releasing dangerous people back into the world. That's what right-wingers are saying. Now, we already knew, I covered this last week, okay? We already knew that George W. Bush, during his presidency, released hundreds of Gitmo detainees, about 30% of which were involved in what they describe as potentially militant activity. 30% of those released by George W. Bush from Gitmo. Compare that with about 6% of those released by President Obama that were involved in potentially militant activity. These 5, right? These are the only 5 released by President Obama, according to the latest reports I read, that were involved in potentially militant activity. So we already knew about this absurd double standard because conservatives weren't complaining about that 30% released by George W. Bush. Let's go back to the January Washington Post. Listen to this, ladies and gentlemen. Benghazi, the rallying cry, the obsession of the American right. George W. Bush released from Guantanamo Bay a detainee named Abu Sufyan bin Kumu, who after being released was involved in the attack in Benghazi that led to the death of Ambassador Christopher Stevens and 3 other Americans. Let me say that again. George W. Bush in 2007 released Mr. Kumu from U.S. prison in Guantanamo Bay and sent him to Libya, where he was initially detained and subsequently released. He is one of the individuals involved in that Benghazi consulate attack that is the obsession of the American right. Lewis, have you ever seen a more hypocritical, double standard bit of outrage from the American right wing?
No, but I imagine if you confronted some of them with his story, they would say that you're lying or that it's made up, or there would be some excuse, right?
There probably would, and it is just disgusting that on the one hand, we have a Republican obsession with Benghazi that ignores the fact that one of the perpetrators was someone that George W. Bush released from Guantanamo Bay, and at the same time, we have those same Republicans criticizing President Obama for releasing a fraction of the Gitmo detainees, who, again, were unlikely to ever stand trial to actually get back an American citizen who they say is a deserter. It is despicable. I've said it time and time again. It is absolutely disgusting what the American right is doing around the Bo Bergdahl case. And that's that. Let's take a break. We'll talk to Nell Bernstein next about juvenile incarceration. Stay with us.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by Nell Bernstein, who's the author of Burning Down the House, as well as All Alone in the World, and a winner of the White House Champion of Change Award. Today we're going to talk about childhood incarceration in the United States. And Nell, I think a good place to start would be, we've talked about adult incarceration rates in the U.S., and how the U.S. is up there with North Korea at the top 2 in terms of incarceration rates for adults. If we look at child incarceration rates, where does the U.S. rank?
Well, we're at an interesting juncture right now, because on the one hand, juvenile incarceration rates are falling significantly. They've dropped by 40% over the past 10 years. At the same time, we are still the number 1 in the U.S., in the world, for locking up our kids by a factor of about 7, I think.
And what types of crimes are getting juveniles in juvenile incarceration facilities?
Well, because juvenile incarceration so often leads to adult incarceration, the important question for me is what type of crimes lead to that first incarceration?
Right.
And there, it's almost always a low-level, non-dangerous offense. Sometimes, graffiti, loitering, public drunkenness, a marijuana charge, and then once you're in the system, endless probation violations. So not the super predator that we were led to believe.
And are there some, I don't know if crimes is the right word, or as you talk about them, status violations that only apply to juveniles, whereas for adults, those actions wouldn't necessarily put them into prison or jail?
That's tricky also, because there were some legal changes meant to eradicate locking kids up for status offenses, particularly running away. But a lot of kids I've met are locked up for something that happened along with a status offense. So you run away and you sleep on the street, and that's a crime. So I think minor offenses, some of which are status offenses, would be the most accurate.
And for people who don't know, can you explain what a status offense is and maybe give us some other examples beyond running away?
Sure. A status offense refers to your status as a juvenile. So it's something that would not be illegal if you were an adult. It's only illegal because you're a kid. So running away, underage drinking, truancy, that's a big one. If I don't go to work, it doesn't go well for me, but I don't go to jail. If my kids make the same choice, they're at risk of a truancy charge, that sort of thing.
And you talked just very briefly there about how the initial juvenile incarceration often leads to incarceration as an adult. So I want to take that in a couple of pieces, because I think there may be a couple of angles to that. First, let's talk about the sentences. How can a juvenile incarceration sentence turn into an adult incarceration sentence?
Well, here's what happens. And I'm going to give you a little bit of background, because this is a figure that really shocked me. 80 to 90% of all American teenagers in confidential interviews will tell you that they've committed an offense serious enough under the law to get them locked up. But most of them are not locked up, right? Nobody notices, they get a pass, or maybe they get some kind of community alternative. And those kids grow up and grow out of the impulsivity that led to that original offense. The portion of the 80 to 90% of Americans who are delinquent, apparently, who get incarcerated, they don't stay straight through to adulthood, but it's a very traumatic experience. Many experience abuse, physical abuse. 1 in 10 are raped by guards. And even without that, it's an environment in which sort of fulfilling all the developmental tasks of adolescence are pretty much impossible. And of course, you develop a criminal identity. So that's why it so often spirals into adult incarceration, along with the stigma and label of being a delinquent.
So let's talk a little bit about that. 80 to 90% of American teenagers admit to some activity that could be classified as a crime, but most will never actually spend any time incarcerated. With adult incarceration, we see the disproportionate application of sentences to those who are poor and to minorities. Do we see those same factors playing a role in what percentage or which ones of those American teenagers end up spending time in prison?
You've asked exactly the right question. And that's why I use that number pretty frequently. I think that some of us are more familiar with statistics like a Black youth is 5 times more likely to be locked up for the same charge and with the same background as a white youth. So there are disproportionalities at every step of the system: arrest, detention, disposition or sentencing, parole, probation. At every juncture, researchers have found not just disparate rates, but differential treatment based on your race and to a lesser degree class. So I think the reason it's so important for me to share that the great majority of teenagers get involved in delinquency is that it really busts the myth that one race is more criminal than another. It turns out as adolescents, we're all delinquents. We have poor judgment, our brains aren't fully developed, and we just need support to get through it.
And let's explore that concept a little bit. So if we look at the cost, and we've explored with adults that very often when it comes to, for example, homelessness, it's actually cheaper to provide housing and basic health care to someone who's homeless than the social costs over the course of a year from that person being homeless. We've talked about adult education. College education is often less expensive than the cost of incarceration. I'm guessing, and I open it up to you to tell me whether I'm right or wrong, that this is even, it's at least equally pronounced when it comes to juveniles in terms of education versus juvenile detention.
I think it's much more pronounced, especially if you consider the opportunity cost of a lost life. We spend $88,000 on average to incarcerate a kid and $10,000 on average to educate a single youth. And the kids know this. The message they get from that is, we'll spend anything to contain you, but nothing to cultivate you. And that's a very destructive message.
When the juvenile detention centers I'll phrase it a different way. How prevalent is solitary confinement in juvenile detention centers? Because that's something that, again, on the adult side, we've talked about the destructive effects long-term of solitary confinement. And again, from an outsider's point of view, I would imagine that destructive effect would be even more significant to a juvenile.
You're right. I mean, the United Nations calls 15 hours or more torture for adults and has any amount of time in solitary is considered torture for children and teenagers. Officially, about a third of juvenile detainees end up in some form of solitary confinement. It's hard to measure because we don't like to use that word. We call it ad-seg, or my favorite, the reflection cottage. Among the kids I met, and I talked to a lot of kids, I think I met maybe 1 or 2 who hadn't experienced some form of solitary confinement or room isolation.
1 or 2 who had not experienced that, you're saying?
That's not empirical, but if you include things like locking down a whole unit because there's a shortage of teachers, so you're in your cell all day, they had all experienced that kind of intense isolation. And at least a third had experienced formal solitary confinement, so a barren cell with maybe just a blanket.
And Nell, officially, on the record, what are the reasons stated in some or many of these cases? How can we characterize the official explanations for why this solitary confinement is being assigned?
Well, it's interesting. Senator Durbin has held a couple hearings on this, and the official explanation given, I think, by the head of the Federal Bureau of Prisons and given by everyone under the sun was safety and security. Don't take this away from us. It's a tool that we need. But the kids who actually end up in solitary, for example, and I heard this over and over, if you threaten suicide or act suicidal, you'll likely end up stripped naked and tossed into a solitary cell, where a disproportionate number of suicides, unsurprisingly, then occur.
Sure.
If you're the aggressor in a fight, you could end up in solitary. If you're the victim of a fight, you could end up in solitary. If they're processing your papers, you could end up in solitary. The number of reasons is almost beyond reason, really.
Incredible. I want to remind everybody that the books are Burning Down the House as well as All Alone in the World. We've been speaking with Nell Bernstein. I recommend both books. Nell, thank you so much for being with us and really shedding light onto something that many people may not even be aware is going on.
Well, thank you. It was my pleasure.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I was in Austin, Texas over the weekend. Lots of interesting stories from Austin, including me getting wrapped into a street fight. I mean, it's just insane. And we will have all those stories on today's bonus show, so make sure to check that out. Do we now have on video maybe the dumbest climate change comment ever? We may. This is Republican Congressman Jeff Miller from Florida. He said that it is straight up foolish to believe that humans can cause global warming. His logic was dinosaur extinction. I want to warm you up for this because if I went right to the dinosaur comment, it would be too nutty. So let's first check out part one of the interview. Okay, check this out.
No, I'm
to swing the moderates when they look at this issue of climate change.
And the truth is, climate has been changing for a long time. They call it global warming, global cooling. Now that everybody wants to call it climate change, yes, the climate is changing. But it has been doing that for centuries. And for us to say that it is a settled argument right now, I think, again, is a foolish argument to make because there are scientists on both sides of the issue that say that it is not settled.
Okay, so this is typical misdirection argument here. There are scientists who say that humans are having no effect on the climate. That is true by the letter of what he's saying, but they're playing up the controversy. That's what Mr. Miller is doing here. And there really is a scientific consensus. Not all opinions are equally scientifically valid, and you can't get thrown by that. So he tries that. It doesn't go that well, and then he comes up with this gem. This is the truly crazy stuff. Listen to this.
So you agree that it is changing?
Oh, I've never said that it wasn't changing.
To a deleterious effect?
It changes. It gets hot, it gets cold. It's done it for as long as we have measured the climate.
But man-made, isn't that the question?
Then why did the dinosaurs go extinct? Were there men that were causing, were there cars running around at that point that were causing global warming? No. The climate has changed since Earth was created.
This is just amazing. This is like all squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares, right? In terms of logical fallacies, this is the proof by example logical fallacy, but kind of in reverse. And it's also the non sequitur logical fallacy, right? In other words, he has found an example where a species went extinct that was not connected with man's activities on Earth. Okay, on the one hand, the proof by one example that doesn't fit is a logical fallacy. And at the same time, dinosaur extinction is a total non sequitur when it comes to modern industrialized climate change. So I don't know that I've ever seen, Lewis, in such a succinct and pithy comment, such nonsense.
Right. You know, a lot of people are just on his side of the argument are just trying to protect big business.
Yeah.
They leave it at, well, there's not a consensus. There are people on both sides of the issue. This guy takes it to this level and starts talking about dinosaurs, it really appears clear that he just has no idea what he's talking about, as opposed to someone who's just trying to protect big business.
He has found a rectangle that is not a square, and he's trying to use that to prove that squares are actually not rectangles. And if we break this down and check out who Congressman Miller is, he said in August, "Our climate will continue to change because of the way that God formed the earth." You're not going to be able to have a rational conversation with someone who believes that. This is intellectual dishonesty combined with ignorance. It is fueled by the anti-intellectualism movement that is increasingly prevalent among the American right, and it is funded, as Lewis said, by the huge climate-denying think tanks and conservative organizations that fund these politicians. We are in serious trouble here. We're also in serious trouble when it comes to net neutrality. When it comes to the plutocratic corruption and big corporate influence around net neutrality, I've already told you about how former cable lobbyist Tom Wheeler is the Obama-appointed chairman of the FCC, right? That alone is enough to give us some information about how corrupt the entire system is. We also talked about how the big corporations that are regularly donating to the members of Congress that will be involved in net neutrality are the corporations that want a specific net neutrality policy enacted, specifically big internet providers who want the fast lanes and the slow lanes. We now have Vice reporting. This is layer 3. Prepare yourselves for this. Vice is reporting that many of the organizations that claim to be consumer advocacy groups saying we want net neutrality, but we don't want internet service providers categorized as common carriers, because that would, by the way, prevent any slow lanes or fast lanes. Those are actually AstroTurf. I'm saddened to say it, but a disclosure was obtained by Vice from the National Cable and Telecom Association, which is a trade group for ISPs, and it shows that the group Broadband for America, which claims to just be a consumer advocacy group that is a coalition of 300 internet consumer advocates, is actually mostly funded by the big cable lobbyist NCTA. $3.5 million is their budget. $2 million of that comes in the form of a donation from the NCTA, one of the biggest cable lobbyists in the country. I guess I'm not surprised, Lewis, but it is absolutely disgusting.
It is. Unfortunately, in this country, the people with money win. So in many ways, this is a one-sided battle. Who are the politicians going to listen to? The ones with tons of money, or the people who are, I don't know, just trying to have, a free internet?
Lewis, we're expected to believe that those donations from these big companies are not meant to sway influence in any way.
Right. Unfortunately, David, we have lots of proof that it does, and in just about every case.
And this also isn't the only example. There's many more, like the Heartland Institute funded by the ISPs.
Right, of course. Yeah, the big money almost always wins. But eventually, I think we will have net neutrality. Unfortunately, right now, I think we're kind of far from it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad Lewis is at least somewhat optimistic about this. It's a horrible situation. Let's go to your voicemails. Our voicemail number is 219-2-DAVID-P. You can call anytime. Here's a voicemail.
Hi, this is David from Anderson, South Carolina. You guys are doing a good job. And just like to make a little comment. We were talking about the background checks on guns and the California tragedy. I think it's ridiculous that you have to go through the trouble that you have to go through for a car, which granted, I'm all for registering cars and everything else, but you can have something that can kill even more people, and there's such a minimal amount of oversight. And in this one group, you would think they would want to have more oversight to legitimize themselves instead of allowing more nutcases to carry guns.
I completely agree with you. There is a complete disproportionality when it comes to oversight. Absolutely spot on voicemail. On today's bonus show, I was in Austin, Texas over the weekend almost got dragged into a street fight. We have so many stories from the weekend, and they will be on the bonus show. We will also talk about Amazon patenting just a basic photography setup. And we will also talk about the mass die-off happening with many fish. davidpakman.com/membership. It is an excellent bonus show today. I hope to have you as a member and have you partake in the bonus show as well as so many other great member benefits. davidpakman.com/membership.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.